Colonel Macgregor, welcome here, my dear friend. Welcome back to the show. Over the weekend, General Zelensky, the commanding military officer in Ukraine, for whom I think you and others have indicated there is general respect in the military community, told The Economist magazine that the military conflagration in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine is at a stalemate, and President Zelensky erupted and sent one of his aides to condemn the general's statement. What do you think is going on?
I think General Zelensky is trying to put a happy face on a dead rat. There is no stalemate. Ukraine is defeated. Ukrainian Army is in ruins. The Russians are advancing. And wherever they are advancing, they are meeting very little resistance. And the one town that the Ukrainians tried to make a stand, Advadika, has ultimately been destroyed and turned into another Bakhmut exercise for the Ukrainians. I think what he's trying to do is get someone in his own government, as well as in Washington, to deal with the truth. Now, privately, behind closed doors in Washington, Judge, they do know the truth. They know it's over. And the longer they stall and refuse to acknowledge that publicly, the further and further the Russians will advance. And that's where we are.
Our friends at NBC News are reporting yesterday that officials from the State Department and from the EU, I don't know who, are talking to each other about the need for negotiations. Are they talking, as far as we know, to President Zelensky? Is this in the offing? If true, this would reinforce what you said, that Washington finally has learned the truth. They've turned off Mrs. Newland.
Well, I'm not sure she's being turned off yet. She's just sort of being put on ice. It would be nice to see her gone completely. But in truth, what they're all saying behind closed doors, Judge, is how do we get out of this without looking ridiculous?
Right.
You know, what can we say or do that will conceal the enormity of the disaster? In the past, you know, we have simply packed our things and left. We did that in Vietnam. I think we did that in Afghanistan. We've done that, I think, for the most part in Iraq, though we've left some people there to maintain the fiction that we have some measure of influence in that country, which I don't think we do. But the bottom line is it's over. And the sooner they get Zelensky out of the way, they can come to some sort of arrangement with the Russians. But let's be frank, the arrangement that they reach is not going to be one that they like. And it may take time before an agreement is reached, because when they say no to the first offer, the Russian forces will resume their advance. And I think we'll be in this position until someone shows up and says, we'll meet your terms, and signs on the dotted line. Nobody wants to do that.
And whatever the terms are, we know they're not going to be what they could have been and would have been 2 years ago when President Putin offered terms that were acceptable until the Americans came in.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this is something important, and I'm glad you brought that up. The only people lying throughout this entire episode have been in the West, particularly the Western elites, globalist elites that remain wedded to Biden and his government, and our elites. Putin has always been truthful. When he halted the advance of his forces in response to a stated willingness on the Ukrainian side to accept neutrality, he was being very serious. Fine, you accept neutrality, we can make some adjustments, and we're out of here. That was all botched badly, and Zelensky was promised everything, and Zelensky believed it. He's going to end up, like everybody else that's ever cooperated with us over time, out of a job and maybe lose his life in the process.
Last subject matter on Russia. RT, Russia Today, reports that former Russian president and now deputy national security advisor, I think is his title, or deputy chair of the National Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, is saying that the Russians need to worry about the Poles, the Polish government. If true, I was surprised to hear him say that. The new Polish government should be more friendly to them than the one that is in office now. Do you know anything about this?
Well, I know my friends in Poland tell me that this new government will probably not last more than 6 to 12 months, if that. I think we're going to see governments turn over all across Europe until finally governments are in place that are both rational and capable of dealing with the enormous problems that face all these countries. So I think his statement about the Poles is not entirely groundless, but I think he's exaggerating. But then again, Medvedev is somebody that is almost, periodically released, from the kennel to go out and bark and frighten people, after which he shuts up and is put back in the kennel.
Right.
When he was president, he got a bad reputation because he was seen as too friendly to us, as too willing to cooperate with us. And ever since, he's been trying to make up for that disaster.
I mean, this is the guy who once said the Russian troops, if we unleash them, will go to Poland's western border, which would mean run over all of Poland.
Yeah, well, that was always nonsense. But
right.
Again, Putin's in charge.
Right.
Medvedev.
Right. And Medvedev makes Putin sound not only rational, but tame by comparison. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Is Israel running into significant resistance in its efforts to subdue Hamas in Gaza? Antiwar.com reported this morning that 350 Israeli troops were killed over the weekend. The IDF doesn't comment on that. If Antiwar.com numbers are accurate, is that a significant number to be concerned about?
Well, first of all, I don't know what the real numbers are for either side, and expecting the truth at this stage is unrealistic. We're going to be told whatever the various sides want us to believe. Is that a realistic appraisal? I'd say it probably is. And keep in mind that the Israelis are just as concerned about casualties in their ranks as the Russians are about casualties in their own. The Russians have been moving very deliberately, very slowly and advancing, and that's true for the Israelis as well. But the Israelis have gained ground. Now, how do you gain ground in this environment? Well, it's scorched earth. You annihilate everything in front of you and essentially flatten large areas. That's happening. And when you do this, then you try to move in and establish a permanent presence, which I think is what the Israelis are trying to do. But it's a long time coming. Remember, this is about the size of Manhattan, maybe a little smaller, and the rubbled buildings make it that much tougher. And of course, you have the tunnel networks. Hopefully, I think the Israelis take the position that hopefully they are depriving the tunnels of oxygen, killing people inside them by collapsing them. But again, it's a tough position because they're also trying to rescue what they say are now 248 hostages. With each passing day, it seems less and less likely that they will survive.
It seems a little out of character to me that their thrust seems to be on massive destruction of infrastructure as opposed to surgical efforts to rescue the hostages, for which the IDF has had some fantastic, remember Entebbe, some fantastic historical success. Does Benjamin Netanyahu really want to rescue the hostages, or does he want to fight a war that's going to take 5 years so he can stay in office for 5 more years?
Well, I think he would like to rescue the hostages. The problem is that in contrast to something like Entebbe, where you had an airplane that was holding hostages, it could be attacked by special operators that practiced for months to do it. This is not that kind of environment. This is the worst of all imaginable environments. And inevitably, unless you want to lose large numbers of your own soldiers by sending them room to room, building to building, crawling through the tunnels, you're probably going to do exactly what Mr. Netanyahu wants to do. And remember, his interest is in annihilating Hamas, and anyone who is near it is viewed as a co-combatant or co-belligerent. In other words, you said surgical. There's nothing surgical in a real war. This is, for the Israelis, for the first time, I would argue, since 1973, a real war. There's no nonsense here. If you go into the building, I'm not going to send 10 soldiers in to find you. I'm going to level the building and move to the next structure. We did that, by the way, in Fallujah to a large extent, and even more so in Mosul. Soldiers are not surgeons. And those Israeli soldiers, whether they're in tanks or armored fighting vehicles or dismounted, are not saying, oh, look over to the left. Well, that's obviously not a combatant. That person can't possibly be part of Hamas. But more to the right, those have got to be Hamas fighters. You don't say that. They want to survive. You survive by killing the enemy before he kills you. So I would never criticize, having been in that position myself on the battlefield, anybody who opens up on a target that they see in front of them that they think is an enemy, whether or not it is. Those are the facts of war. That's always been true. The problem, though, is that he wants to do more than simply destroy Gaza. I think he wants to drive the population out. If it doesn't die there, then drive it out and eliminate the Gaza Strip.
When he makes the argument